The development of handgun shooting technique has been the result of well over a century of use from various parts. That includes large part from the competition world and from military and law enforcement experience as well. Ideas common in marksmanship instruction really started to flourish in the middle of the 19th century. Manufacturing technique allowed for rifled firearms to become more readily available, and people sought to find ways to exploit that. Competitive programs were deeply entwined with much of this, and the first programs focused what we would now call bullseye style shooting because they were just trying to figure out ways to make efficient use of the equipment. Ideas first used in rifle shooting and training started to work their way towards handgun as well. The first efforts at a more formal approach to handgun shooting really just miniaturized what had already been done with rifles. Of course, it was not lost on some that this was probably not the most practical way to make use of a handgun for more real-world type applications. This was when various attempts at point shooting began to be introduced. These are an example of a good first attempt, but in this case, first was worst. A large reason for this rationale of a completely sightless approach was simply due to the nature of the equipment of the day. The first attempts at making sights for handguns gave us very tiny sights, things that you really can't use quickly, particularly under less than ideal lighting conditions. It'll work fine on a well-lit bullseye type target, for example, in slow fire, not so much at speed.
The targets were only about 21 feet away and about 18 inches in diameter. And the two guys would get up there and blast away, and they'd fire 12 shots, 6 apiece, and the balloons are still hanging there, see? It was getting kind of funny after a while. Even the audience was laughing at some of that. So I realized at the time, I said, well, it doesn't matter how fast you are, how fast can you hit the targets, what counts. And then I figured out, if I just raised the gun up just about a foot higher and tilt my head down a little bit, I could see the sights. And it was just as fast, didn't take any longer to move it an extra few inches. I thought, this I had something. So I did that for a whole year. And I got where I could hit the target each time, and even when you're dry firing, you can practice this with an empty gun and still get some good out of it because you can see where the sights are, you know. I was really on to something, I thought, and sure enough, I won. Wiped them all out. So it looked kind of stupid, everybody was laughing at me, but it worked. So I took the money. So then they started having different kinds of shoots. Instead of waiting a year while they had one every month, they had all different types of shoots. They have multiple targets, or maybe you had to move from one to another, or targets were moving, or different distances, and there's no limit to what you could do. And my system worked better on all those than it did at the leather slap, really.
It's worth noting that this transition towards two-handed sighted fire did not take place immediately. In fact, one of Jeff Cooper's first books on handguns, he still advocated for a point shooting type approach. This, of course, was before he started hosting shooting matches. Even in the 1970s, there were still people attending these events using a hip shooting or point shooting approach. Of course, as more people gained more experience with this, the approaches were revised. Even as poorly as some police officers perform in officer-involved shootings, just the simple fact of adopting a two-handed, eye-level, sighted approach proved much more valuable. So much so that a shooter trained in this approach who isn't using sights can still make effective hits.